Coming up today, Korea's ruling party is renewing its push to have the KoreaChina Free Trade Agreement ratified before the year is out. The main opposition raises concerns about the deal's effect on Korea's agricultural industry. A new World Bank report says South Korea is the fourth easiest place in the world to do business. Plus, China reacts angrily after a US warship enters disputed waters in the South China Sea. Washington's defense chief says more sail-bys will happen. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 28th of October. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. I'm Mark Broome. And we start with news that Korea's ruling Saenuri Party is seeking to ratify the Korea-China Free Trade Deal before the end of the year. The fast-tracked timeline might be difficult to achieve, though, as the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy remains lukewarm about the bilateral pact. The NPAD is demanding the government first introduce measures to support the agricultural and other industries that could be affected heavily by this FTA. However, the ruling party says such measures are unnecessary as the deal was reached with enough safety measures to safeguard Korea's agricultural businesses. The ruling bloc hopes to reach common ground with the opposition at a meeting this Friday and make headway in sealing the deal within the National Assembly. Seoul and Beijing approved the trade deal last November and concluded it at a signing ceremony in June. Now, the World Bank says South Korea is one of the easiest countries in the world to do business in. In fact, only Singapore, New Zealand and Denmark are better. And South Korea is leaps and bounds ahead of its regional rivals like China and Japan. Oh Young has the details.
Korea is the fourth easiest country to do business in, according to a World Bank report published Wednesday. Asia's fourth largest economy has been on a steady rise in rankings these past 6 years, achieving a steep leap from 19th in 2009. Singapore maintained its first place for a 10th straight year, followed by New Zealand and Denmark. Meanwhile, Japan tumbled from 29th to 34th, while China rose 6 notches to 84th. The annual Doing Business report ranked 189 countries based on 10 indicators, including obtaining licensing approvals, starting a business, and the ease of cross-border trading. In terms of G20 countries, Korea ranks first, while among OECD countries it ranks third behind New Zealand and Denmark. Korea's finance ministry attributes the upward trend to consistent government efforts to create a business-friendly environment through laws and infrastructure. The ministry says it will continue to improve regulations on labour, land and the environment for each industry. Oh Young, Arirang News.
Now, the first legal hearing related to the ongoing family feud at the top of Korea's fifth largest conglomerate Lotte Group began this morning in Seoul. The elderly founder of the group, Shin Gyok-ho, and his eldest son, Shin Dong-ju, are seeking an injunction against Lotte Shopping in order to read the company's accounting records, which is translated as an effort to emphasize the current chairman's business failures in China. Now, this is the first hearing for one of the 3 lawsuits filed by Shin Dong-ju against his younger brother, Shin Dong-bin. Now, none of the family members are at court in Seoul today. In Korea, the elder brother, Dong-ju, filed a lawsuit against the management of Lotte Hotel and Lotte Hotel Busan earlier this month after he was sacked from his executive position. He also filed a lawsuit in a Japanese court to nullify the dismissal of his father as chairman of Lotte Group. Further trial dates have yet to be set. Now, the employment rate of older Koreans is above the OECD average, in another indication that many people approaching retirement age in Korea are scrambling to prepare financially for their old age. According to the latest OECD quarterly employment situation statistics, the employment rate of workers aged 55 to 64 in Korea in the second quarter of 2015 was 65.5%, and this is well above the OECD average of 58%. The corresponding figure for older men was very high, 78.8%, and that's over 10 percentage points more than the OECD average and the 6th highest among the 34 member nations. Older Korean women are also above the OECD average, and nearly half of older workers in Korea were part-time or temporary workers. Now, Korea's leading shipbuilders are continuing to bleed, with industry analysts predicting the 3 top companies will record huge losses this year. And analysts say, that this is being driven by delays in offshore plant business. Shin Se-min reports.
Reeling from a decline in international expansion coupled with a slump in demand for new vessels, Korea's top 3 shipbuilders are drastically losing more money. Industry data shows the top 3 shipbuilders, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, Hyundai and Samsung Heavy Industries, are expected to post a combined loss of over 8 trillion won, roughly $7 billion this year. This is said to be the first time all 3 have individually bled annual operating losses of over 1 trillion won, roughly $0.8 billion. Already, Daewoo Shipbuilding, the country's 2nd largest shipbuilder, logged an operating loss of over 3.7 billion in the first 9 months this year, resulting from increased costs arising from the delayed construction of low-priced ships and offshore facilities. Hyundai Heavy Industry, Korea's leading shipbuilder, isn't an exception, as it already suffered a 2.8 billion loss last year. Blaming the loss on dropping oil prices, Hyundai logged 3 quarterly losses this year, a continuation of 8 straight quarterly operating losses since late 2013. A shift in strategy to focus on deep-sea drilling rigs and production facilities is considered the major reason behind the continued deficits facing Korea's largest shipbuilders. Industry watchers say the delay in offshore rig projects also played a role, saying that once deliveries are made, the shipbuilders' profits will see a rebound. However, although it is difficult to predict when the companies will return to profit, watchers say the trend will likely continue at least until the end of this year. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, the geopolitical game of chicken between the United States and China just went up a couple of notches. Despite an angry reaction from Beijing, Washington says it will continue to carry out naval operations in the South China Sea. Son Jung-in has more.
U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter has confirmed that the guided missile destroyer USS Lassen traveled within 12 nautical miles of artificial islands created by China last year in the disputed Spratly Islands chain. Carter testified during a congressional hearing on Tuesday local time that the American destroyer entered the waters without Beijing's permission. He added that the U.S. will continue with the routine activities as it is allowed to do under international law.
We have said, and we are acting on the basis of saying that we will fly, sail, and operate wherever international law permits.
The disputed Spratly Islands have been a source of rising tensions between Washington and Beijing, especially since China transformed reefs in the area into small islands capable of supporting military facilities. The U.S. has repeatedly said it does not recognize Chinese claims to territorial waters around the artificial islands. The U.S. operations infuriated Beijing, prompting China's Vice Foreign Minister Zhang Yesui to summon U.S. Ambassador Max Baucus on Tuesday to protest what he called a serious provocation that threatens China's sovereignty and security interests. Watchers say the spike in tension is not expected to lessen anytime soon, as both countries are confronting the issue head-on. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Now, international experts on North Korea have jointly denounced the growing nuclear and missile threats and the dire human rights situation in the communist state. At a seminar hosted by Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies on Tuesday local time, U.S. Senator Cory Gardner said Washington should take a more serious approach to confront North Korean threats, as its policy of so-called strategic patience had failed. He also said the U.S. should be at the forefront of efforts to end the North's human rights abuses, saying they could face much greater challenges in the future if they do not act now. Robert King, who is US Special Envoy for North Korea's human rights issues, highlighted the country's political prison camps, saying the system remains brutal and inhumane. The South Korean Red Cross and the Unification Ministry are going to check up on the psychological well-being of the South Koreans who took part in the recently concluded reunions for war-separated families. Officials say counsellors and volunteer workers will visit the 643 participants in the coming days and weeks, but didn't elaborate on the exact timing. Those who require extra psychological care will be connected to the necessary healthcare facilities. The same checkups were held following reunions held in February 2014, but none of the participants required any serious aftercare. And as we just mentioned, the reunions between the families separated by the Korean War successfully ended earlier this week, but now a group of South Korean labor union workers is heading to Pyongyang for a friendly soccer match with their North Korean counterparts. And this will be their first encounter in 8 years, raising hopes that civic exchanges between the two Koreas may increase. Kwon-swa has this report.
Members of South Korea's two major labor unions are departing from Gimpo International Airport on Wednesday for a friendly soccer match with their North Korean counterparts in Pyongyang on Thursday. They will fly using the same aircraft Korea's former First Lady Lee Hee-ho used for her visit to the North in August. With two teams from each side of the border, matches will be held over 2 days. This is the first series of matches in 8 years and the third in total. With 162 members, the South Korean delegation is the largest visiting the North for any event since 2010, when inter-Korean relations chilled following Seoul's sanctions on Pyongyang after an attack on the South Korean warship the Cheonan that killed 46 South Korean sailors. Seoul's Unification Ministry approved the games on Tuesday, with an official saying the match is meant purely for sporting exchanges. The official added that the ministry has seen proactive cases of inter-Korean exchanges since August, following high-level talks between Seoul and Pyongyang. Examples include such areas as agricultural support and forest development. Due to concerns of any political analysis arising from the event, both labor groups are restricting media coverage. Kwon-swa, Arirang News.
Now, the death toll from a powerful earthquake which rocked northern Afghanistan and Pakistan has risen to at least 425. The figure includes 310 people who died in Pakistan and 115 in Afghanistan. The number of dead is expected to rise further as rescuers are finally managing to get through to remote villages and areas cut off by landslides. Hundreds of buildings were leveled as the initial magnitude 7.5 quake struck on Monday afternoon local time. Several powerful aftershocks have also hampered rescue efforts. The Pentagon has selected the US-based defense firm Northrop Grumman to build the US Air Force's next-generation long-range strike bomber. US Defense Secretary Ashton Carter and Air Force leadership announced on Tuesday local time that Northrop beat out the team of Boeing and Lockheed Martin for the massive contract. The deal could end up topping $80 billion US over the life of the program if the US buys 100 of these jets. The new fleet of aircraft will eventually replace the Air Force's aging B-52s and B-1 bombers. The US Air Force says the new stealth bomber will have the ability to launch from the US and strike any target around the world. Carter said the new warplane is a strategic military investment for the next 50 years. Now, the global economy might be struggling, but the world's most valuable company is doing just fine, thank you very much, posting record earnings. Apple says its profits came in at $11.1 billion in the fiscal fourth quarter. That's a jump of 31% from a year ago. Revenue was $51.5 billion, up 22% from last year. The company's iPhone sales were the strong point, with Apple shipping 48 million of them in the fourth quarter, up from 39 million from the same quarter last year. China was the real hotspot for Apple. iPhone sales in the world's second largest economy spiked 87%, thanks in large part to the popularity of the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus. Now, despite the rosy figures, some analysts remain concerned that Apple's growth rate will contract over the next year. And one of Apple's rivals, Samsung Electronics, has been chosen as the most recognized brand in Brazil for the third straight year. According to a Brazilian daily, the Korean tech giant was named the winner of the 2015 Top of Mind Award, which has been recognizing brands with top-of-mind awareness among Brazilian consumers. Samsung shared the top position in the main category with other companies including Coca-Cola, Nike, and a company called Omo. Well, those are the stories we have for you on this Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out our website. Just go to arirang.com/news. Have a great day. Goodbye.